Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted the heavy rifle scope for the 100th time that morning. The Nevada desert sun beat down mercilessly on the military training facility, creating waves of heat that danced across the barren landscape like ghosts. Around her, 23 other recruits from various military branches had gathered for the most elite sniper training program in the United States Armed Forces. At 26 years old, Sarah was the only woman in the group. She had earned her place through exceptional marksmanship scores during her time as an Army Ranger, but, standing among these battle-hardened soldiers, she felt the weight of every skeptical glance thrown her way. The men around her carried themselves with the confident swagger of warriors who had seen combat, their faces etched with experiences she could only imagine. Commander Jake Razor Thompson, a legendary Navy SEAL with 15 years of active duty and countless confirmed kills, stood at the front of the group like a mountain of muscle and intimidation. His steel-gray eyes swept across the assembled recruits, pausing momentarily on Sarah before moving on. The pause was brief, but she caught it, along with the almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson's voice boomed across the range, his tone carrying the authority of a man who had led men through hell and back. "Welcome to the most challenging sniper course in the world. Over the next 8 weeks, we will push you beyond your limits, test your resolve, and separate the wheat from the chaff. Most of you will not make it through the first week." Sarah's fingers tightened around her rifle grip. She had heard whispers about this program since joining the Army 4 years ago. Only the best of the best were even considered for selection, and the dropout rate was legendary. In the past decade, fewer than 30 soldiers had successfully completed the course. "Before we begin," Thompson continued, his gaze once again finding Sarah, "I want to make something clear. This is not a place for political correctness or social experiments. This is about life and death, about the ability to take a shot that could save your squad or eliminate a high-value target from over a mile away. There are no participation trophies here." A few of the men around Sarah exchanged knowing looks. She had grown accustomed to such attitudes during her military career, but it still stung every time. Despite proving herself repeatedly, there were always those who saw her gender before her skills. The first exercise was a basic marksmanship test from 600 yards. Each recruit would take 10 shots at a human-sized target, and those who failed to achieve at least 7 hits would be immediately dismissed from the program. Sarah watched as the first few shooters took their positions, their movements precise and confident. When her turn came, Sarah approached the firing line with measured steps. Behind her, she could hear the whispered conversations of her fellow recruits. $50 says she doesn't hit more than 3, muttered Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine sniper with combat experience in Afghanistan. "I'll take that bet," replied Corporal Jenkins, an Army Ranger like Sarah. "But I'm betting on 4, maybe 5 if she's lucky." The comments weren't meant to be cruel, Sarah realized. These men simply couldn't conceive of a woman possessing the skills necessary to excel in their world. To them, she was an anomaly, a checkbox marked by politicians far removed from the realities of warfare. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar embrace of the rifle against her shoulder. The weapon was heavier than what she was used to, a precision instrument capable of reaching out and touching targets at distances that would make most marksmen weep. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle into the rhythm she had perfected through years of training. The wind was minimal, perhaps 3 miles per hour from the east. The temperature was climbing toward 100 degrees, which would affect the bullet's trajectory slightly. She made the necessary adjustments to her scope, compensating for the environmental factors that could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. Her first shot broke the silence like thunder. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact the target's center mass, creating a small puff of dust as it penetrated the material. The whispers behind her quieted somewhat, but she knew one good shot meant nothing. Anyone could get lucky once. Her second shot followed quickly, landing just 2 inches to the right of the first. The third shot was even better, punching through the target's chest area with surgical precision. By her 5th shot, the conversations behind her had stopped entirely. By her 8th shot, she could hear Commander Thompson's boots approaching her position. When the smoke cleared from her 10th and final shot, Sarah lowered her rifle and waited for the range officer to call out her score. The silence stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the desert wind whistling through the facility's structures. 10 out of 10, the range officer announced, his voice carrying a note of surprise. All shots within the kill zone. Sarah stood and turned to face the group, her expression neutral despite the satisfaction blooming in her chest. She had not only met the standard, she had exceeded it. But, instead of congratulations or acknowledgement, she was met with a wall of skeptical faces. "Lucky day," Rodriguez muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see her do that when it matters," added another voice from the group. Commander Thompson stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Sarah despite the overhead sun. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Not bad, Martinez," he said finally. "But, shooting paper targets in ideal conditions is kindergarten compared to what's coming. We'll see how you handle yourself when the pressure's on and lives are hanging in the balance." The dismissal in his tone was clear, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had spent 4 years proving herself, over and over again, only to be met with the same dismissive attitudes. But, she kept her voice level when she responded. "Looking forward to it, sir." Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly at her response, as if he were trying to read something in her expression. After a moment, he nodded curtly and moved on to address the next recruit. As the day progressed, Sarah continued to excel in every exercise thrown at her. Physical fitness tests, equipment maintenance, tactical knowledge assessments, she met or exceeded the standards in every category. Yet with each success, the comments from her fellow recruits grew more pointed. "She's overcompensating," she heard one man say during a break. "Trying too hard to prove she belongs," added another. "Just wait until we get into the real training. She'll crack under pressure like they always do." The words stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had hoped that her performance would speak for itself, that her skills would earn her the respect of her peers. Instead, it seemed that every achievement was dismissed as luck, overcompensation, or temporary success that would inevitably crumble when faced with real challenges. That evening, as the recruits settled into their temporary barracks, Sarah found herself isolated from the easy camaraderie that developed among the men. They shared stories of previous deployments, compared scars earned in distant battlefields, and bonded over experiences that excluded her by virtue of her gender and relative inexperience in combat situations. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling and listening to the conversations flowing around her. Part of her wanted to join in, to share her own stories of training and preparation, but she knew her words would be met with polite dismissal at best. "You know what I heard?" Rodriguez's voice cut through the darkness. "I heard they're only letting women into these programs now because of pressure from Washington. Some kind of diversity initiative." "Makes sense," replied Jenkins. "No way she'd be here on merit alone. I mean, she shoots okay, but this course isn't just about shooting. It's about having the stones to take a life from 1,000 yards away when everything depends on it." "Exactly," chimed in another voice. "When the chips are down and her squad is counting on her, she'll hesitate. It's in their nature. They're nurturers, not killers." Sarah's hands clenched into fists beneath her thin blanket. The casual certainty in their voices, the way they discussed her as if she weren't lying just a few feet away, made her stomach burn with anger. But she forced herself to remain silent, to let their ignorance wash over her without response. Arguing would only confirm their preconceptions about emotional women who couldn't handle criticism. The next morning brought new challenges. Commander Thompson introduced them to advanced shooting scenarios, including moving targets, extreme distances, and environmental obstacles. Sarah approached each task with grim determination, knowing that every shot would be scrutinized, every mistake magnified. The moving target exercise proved particularly challenging. Recruits were required to track and engage targets moving at various speeds across the range while accounting for wind, distance, and the target's projected path. It was a complex calculation that required split-second decision-making and flawless execution. Sarah watched as the first few shooters attempted the exercise with mixed results. Some managed to connect with 1 or 2 targets out of 5 attempts, while others failed to register a single hit. When her turn came, she approached the firing line with the same methodical preparation that had served her well the day before. The first target appeared suddenly, from behind a barrier, a silhouette moving at a steady pace from left to right. Sarah tracked it through her scope, calculating the lead time needed to compensate for its movement. Her shot rang out just as the target reached the center of its trajectory, and she watched with satisfaction as it spun and fell. The second target moved faster, zigzagging unpredictably across the range. Sarah followed its erratic path, waiting for the moment when its movement would stabilize enough for a clean shot. When the opportunity came, she took it without hesitation, and the target crumpled to the ground. By the time she had engaged all 5 targets, Sarah had achieved 4 confirmed hits and 1 near miss that would have wounded rather than killed. It was the best performance of the day by far, but, instead of congratulations, she was met with stony silence from her fellow recruits. "Show off," someone muttered under their breath. Thompson approached her position as she secured her weapon, his expression thoughtful. He studied the fallen targets for a moment before turning his attention to Sarah. "Where did you learn to shoot moving targets like that?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. "My father taught me when I was young," Sarah replied honestly. "We used to hunt together, and he insisted I learn to track wounded game. He said if you're going to take a life, you have to be prepared to finish what you start." Thompson nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "Your father was a hunter?" "Army sniper, actually. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He died in a car accident when I was 17. The admission hung in the air between them, and Sarah immediately regretted sharing such personal information. She had learned early in her military career that showing vulnerability was often interpreted as weakness, particularly by those already inclined to doubt her capabilities. But Thompson's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment, she glimpsed something resembling understanding in his steel-gray eyes. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, keep up the good work, Martinez. You're setting quite a pace for the others to follow." As he walked away, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps her performance was beginning to chip away at the wall of skepticism surrounding her. Perhaps she was finally proving that her place in the program was earned rather than given. That hope was quickly extinguished during the lunch break when she overheard Rodriguez talking to a group of recruits near the mess tent. "I don't care how well she shoots," he was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the small dining area. "When the bullets start flying for real, when her teammates are bleeding out and, depending on her to take out the enemy sniper who's pinning them down, she'll freeze up. It's biological. Women aren't wired for that kind of pressure." "Exactly," agreed Jenkins. "And now we're all going to suffer because Thompson has to pretend she's just as capable as the rest of us. Political correctness is going to get people killed." Sarah stared down at her untouched meal, her appetite completely gone. The casual certainty in their voices, the way they spoke about her freezing under pressure as if it were scientific fact rather than prejudice, made her feel hollow inside. No matter how well she performed, how many targets she hit, how many standards she exceeded, she would always be seen as a liability by these men. The afternoon brought urban warfare scenarios, where recruits had to navigate through mock buildings while identifying and engaging hostile targets while avoiding civilians. It was a complex exercise that required not only marksmanship skills but also tactical awareness and split-second decision-making abilities. Sarah excelled once again, clearing her assigned building with textbook precision while achieving the highest accuracy rate of any recruit. But, as she emerged from the structure, weapon lowered and safety engaged, she was met with the same dismissive attitudes that had followed her throughout the program. "Must be nice to have all that time to line up your shots," Rodriguez commented loudly. "Real combat doesn't give you the luxury of taking your time." "Yeah," added Jenkins. "In Afghanistan, we had to make life-or-death decisions in milliseconds. No time for that careful, methodical approach she's using." Sarah felt her control slipping as their words washed over her. The implication was clear: her success was due to overcautiousness rather than skill, and such an approach would fail catastrophically in real combat situations. "Is there something you'd like to say, gentlemen?" she asked, turning to face the group directly for the first time. The men exchanged glances, surprised by her direct confrontation. Rodriguez recovered first, his expression hardening into the mask of masculine bravado she had come to know so well. Just making observations about different approaches to tactical situations, he replied with false innocence. No offense intended. Of course not, Sarah said, her voice leveled despite the anger building in her chest. Just like yesterday when you were discussing my biological limitations. All just tactical observations. The group fell silent, and Sarah realized that her overheard their supposedly private conversation. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they processed the implications of being caught talking about her behind her back. Commander Thompson chose that moment to approach the group, his massive presence immediately changing the dynamic of the confrontation. His eyes moved between Sarah and the men, taking in their tense body language and guilty expressions. Problem here, he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. No sir, Rodriguez replied quickly. Just discussing tactical approaches. Thompson's gaze lingered on Sarah, and she could see him weighing whether to pursue the matter further. After a moment, he nodded curtly. Good. Save the tactical discussions for after hours. We have training to complete. As the group dispersed, Sarah caught Thompson's eye. For just a moment, she thought she saw something like sympathy in his expression, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. The rest of the afternoon passed without major incident, but Sarah could feel the tension that now existed between her and several of the other recruits. By challenging them directly, she had violated the unspoken rule that required her to silently endure their doubts and criticisms. She had shown her anger, and, in their minds, this probably confirmed their beliefs about women being too emotional for combat roles. That evening, as the recruits gathered for their traditional after-training discussion, Sarah found herself completely excluded from the conversation. The men talked around her as if she were invisible, their voices carefully modulated to avoid any topics that might be construed as criticism of her performance. The silence was somehow worse than their open skepticism. At least before, she had known where she stood with them. Now, she existed in a strange limbo where her presence was acknowledged but not welcomed, where her achievements were noted but not respected. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah reflected on the day's events and the challenges that lay ahead. She had proven her shooting skills beyond any reasonable doubt, but it was becoming clear that marksmanship was only part of the battle she faced. The real challenge would be earning the respect and trust of men who seemed determined to see her as a political statement rather than a soldier. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances for her fellow recruits to find reasons to doubt her capabilities. But Sarah Martinez had not come this far to be defeated by prejudice and ignorance. She would continue to excel, continue to exceed every standard placed before her, and eventually, she hoped, her actions would speak louder than their assumptions. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah dreamed of her father's words from so many years ago, "If you're going to take a life, you have to be prepared to finish what you start." She had interpreted those words literally when she was young, applying them to hunting wounded game. But now, she understood their deeper meaning. She had started something by accepting her place in this program, and she would see it through to the end, regardless of the obstacles placed in her path. The third week of training brought a dramatic shift in the program's intensity. Commander Thompson had eliminated 8 recruits already, sending them back to their units with recommendations that they never attempt sniper training again. The remaining 16 soldiers had settled into an uneasy rhythm of competition and cooperation, with Sarah continuing to excel despite the persistent doubts of her peers. The morning briefing took place in a concrete classroom that smelled of dust and military issue coffee. Thompson stood before a large topographical map, his pointer indicating various terrain features as he outlined the week's primary challenge. "Gentlemen and lady," he began, his acknowledgement of Sarah feeling more like an afterthought than genuine inclusion, "this week we begin field exercises. You will be working in 4-person teams, conducting reconnaissance and elimination missions in terrain that mimics real-world combat environments." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Thompson continued his briefing. Team exercises meant she would be forced to work closely with men who still viewed her as a liability. She had excelled in individual challenges, but military operations were fundamentally about teamwork and trust. If her teammates didn't believe in her abilities, the entire mission could fail. "Team assignments are posted on the board," Thompson announced. You have 30 minutes to gather your gear and meet your teammates at the designated staging areas. Remember, your performance during these exercises will determine whether you continue in this program or pack your bags for home. Sarah approached the assignment board with growing dread, scanning the lists until she found her name. Team Charlie, Martinez, Rodriguez, Jenkins, and Patterson. Her heart sank as she read the names. Rodriguez and Jenkins were the most vocal critics of her presence in the program, while Patterson was a quiet Navy SEAL who had never spoken to her directly but whose disapproving glances spoke volumes. The team staging area was a small tent where the 4 soldiers were expected to plan their mission and coordinate their equipment. Sarah arrived first, using the time to review the terrain maps and mission objectives. They were tasked with infiltrating an enemy compound, gathering intelligence on enemy positions, and eliminating 2 high-value targets before extracting to a predetermined rally point. Rodriguez entered the tent with his characteristic swagger, followed closely by Jenkins and Patterson. The 3 men exchanged greetings and began discussing the mission as if Sarah weren't present. She listened to their conversation, noting their tactical assumptions and equipment choices, but waited for an invitation to contribute that never came. "So we're thinking Rodriguez takes point," Jenkins was saying, spreading a map across the folding table. "Patterson provides overwatch from this ridgeline here, and I'll handle close protection for the spotter." Sarah waited for them to assign her a role in their plan, but the silence stretched uncomfortably as the men continued their discussion without including her. Finally, she cleared her throat and spoke up. "What about fields of fire from the northern approach?" she asked, pointing to an area of the map they hadn't considered. "If we're compromised during infiltration, that's where enemy reinforcements would most likely come from." The 3 men looked at her with expressions ranging from annoyance to condescension. Rodriguez was the first to respond, his tone suggesting he was explaining something to a child. "Martinez, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this kind of planning requires experience with real-world combat situations. Maybe you should focus on keeping up with the team and following orders." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced her voice to remain level. "I've studied every major sniper engagement from the past 20 years. The northern approach is a classic avenue of attack in this type of terrain." "Studying and doing are 2 different things," Patterson spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. "Book learning doesn't prepare you for the reality of combat." Jenkins nodded in agreement. "Look, Martinez, we're not trying to be difficult here. It's just that this mission requires split-second decision-making based on experience that, frankly, you don't have." The dismissal was so casual, so absolute, that Sarah felt something snap inside her. She had spent 3 weeks proving herself over and over again, exceeding every standard, outperforming most of her peers, only to be treated like a tourist who had wandered into the wrong classroom. "Fine," she said, standing up from the table. "What role do you want me to play in this mission?" The 3 men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them communicating without words. Finally, Rodriguez spoke with the air of someone making a generous concession. "You can carry extra ammunition and provide backup in case one of our primary weapons malfunctions. Just stay close, follow our lead, and try not to do anything that might compromise the mission." Sarah stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. They were relegating her to the role of pack mule, treating one of the program's top performers as if she were a liability to be managed rather than an asset to be utilized. "You want me to carry ammunition," she repeated, her voice flat. "It's an important job," Jenkins added quickly, sensing her anger. Ammunition resupply can mean the difference between mission success and failure. The condescending tone was the final straw. Sarah had endured 3 weeks of doubt, skepticism, and casual dismissal, but being assigned to carry extra bullets while her teammates handled the actual mission was beyond insulting. "I see," she said quietly. "And if you need precision shooting at extended range? If the mission requires taking out targets beyond your effective range? We'll handle the shooting," Rodriguez replied firmly. "That's what we're trained for." Sarah looked around the tent at the 3 men who would be her teammates for the most important exercise of the program. In their eyes, she saw not hostility but something worse, pity. They genuinely believed they were protecting her from responsibilities she couldn't handle, shielding her from the harsh realities of combat for her own good. "Understood," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I'll gather the extra ammunition." The mission began at dawn, with Team Charlie inserting into hostile territory via helicopter. The Nevada desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation that provided minimal cover. The enemy compound was located in a valley approximately 3 kilometers from their insertion point, requiring careful navigation through terrain that offered multiple opportunities for observation or ambush. Sarah found herself relegated to the back of the formation, carrying nearly 40 pounds of extra ammunition in addition to her standard combat load. Rodriguez led the team with confident strides, while Jenkins and Patterson maintained overwatch positions as they moved. Sarah's role was limited to following quietly and staying out of the way. The irony was not lost on her. She was arguably the best marksman in the remaining group of recruits, yet she had been assigned to carry bullets for men whose shooting skills she had consistently surpassed. But she kept her frustrations in check, focusing on the mission objectives and looking for opportunities to contribute despite her teammates' limitations on her role. 2 hours into the mission, Team Charlie reached their overwatch position overlooking the enemy compound. Through her scope, Sarah could see the layout of buildings and identify potential target locations. The compound was larger than anticipated, with multiple structures and several enemy personnel visible moving between positions. Rodriguez began coordinating the team's approach, his voice low and confident as he outlined their infiltration route. Sarah listened carefully, noting several potential problems with his plan that he seemed to have overlooked. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, raising her hand slightly to get his attention. "I'm seeing movement in Building 3 that wasn't in the intelligence briefing. Looks like they have more personnel than expected." Rodriguez barely glanced at the building she indicated before dismissing her observation. "Probably just shadows." The intel was solid. Sarah looked through her scope again, confirming what she had seen. "It's not shadows. I count at least 4 additional personnel, and they're armed." "Martinez," Jenkins interrupted, his tone carrying the patience of someone dealing with an overwrought child, "why don't you focus on managing our ammunition supply and let us handle the tactical assessment?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She was providing legitimate tactical intelligence that could affect the mission's success, yet her teammates were dismissing her observations without even bothering to verify them. Patterson lowered his binoculars and looked at the building Sarah had indicated. After a moment of careful observation, his expression changed slightly. "She's right," he said quietly. "4 additional tangos in Building 3. They're partially concealed, but they're definitely there." Rodriguez and Jenkins quickly focused their attention on the building, confirming Sarah's observation. The discovery of additional enemy personnel required them to revise their entire approach, adding complexity to an already challenging mission. "Good eyes, Martinez," Rodriguez admitted grudgingly. "But spotting targets and engaging them are different skill sets." The backhanded compliment stung, but Sarah accepted it without comment. At least her teammates were beginning to acknowledge her contributions, even if they couldn't bring themselves to trust her with more significant responsibilities. The team spent the next hour conducting detailed reconnaissance of the compound, identifying enemy positions, patrol routes, and potential escape routes. Sarah continued to provide valuable intelligence, spotting details that her teammates had missed and offering tactical suggestions that improved their mission plan. Despite her contributions, when it came time to assign shooting responsibilities, Rodriguez, Jenkins, and Patterson divided the targets among themselves while Sarah was instructed to maintain overwatch on their extraction route. "Your job is to watch our 6, Rodriguez explained. "If anything goes wrong during the mission, you provide early warning and covering fire while we extract." Sarah wanted to argue that her shooting skills were demonstrably superior to at least 2 of her teammates, but she understood the futility of such protests. They had made their decision based on prejudice rather than performance, and no amount of logical argument would change their minds. The mission commenced at noon, with Rodriguez and Jenkins moving into position for their shots while Patterson provided overwatch from an elevated position. Sarah remained at the extraction route, feeling like a spectator at an event where she should have been a primary participant. Through her scope, she watched as her teammates attempted to engage their assigned targets. Rodriguez's first shot missed entirely, striking the building wall several feet to the left of his intended target. Jenkins fared better, wounding his target but failing to achieve a clean kill. The compound erupted into activity as enemy personnel scrambled to locate the source of the gunfire. Sarah could see through her scope that the mission was rapidly deteriorating, with her teammates' missed and ineffective shots alerting the entire enemy force to their presence. Contact left. Patterson's voice crackled through her earpiece. Multiple tangos moving to flank our position. Sarah swung her rifle toward the threat Patterson had identified, quickly acquiring targets through her scope. 6 enemy personnel were moving in a coordinated flanking maneuver that would put them in position to overrun her teammates' position within minutes. I have eyes on the flanking force, Sarah reported calmly. 6 tangos moving through the ravine approximately 800 meters from your position. Can you engage? Rodriguez's voice was tight with stress as he struggled to reacquire his original target. Sarah settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing and calculating the environmental factors that would affect her shots. The targets were moving quickly across broken terrain, making accurate shooting extremely challenging. Engaging, she reported, and began systematically working through the enemy formation. Her first shot dropped the lead enemy soldier cleanly, causing the rest of the formation to dive for cover among the rocks. Sarah tracked the movement patterns of the remaining enemies, predicting their likely positions and waiting for opportunities to engage. Her second shot caught an enemy soldier as he attempted to bound between covered positions, spinning him around and sending him tumbling into a crevice. The remaining enemies became more cautious, but Sarah had studied their movement patterns and could anticipate their next actions. One by one, she eliminated the flanking force with precision that bordered on the surgical. Each shot was carefully planned and expertly executed, taking into account wind, elevation, and target movement to achieve clean kills at distances that pushed the limits of her equipment. Flanking force neutralized, she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The radio crackled with stunned silence from her teammates. In less than 5 minutes, Sarah had accomplished what they had been struggling to achieve all afternoon, eliminating multiple targets at extended range while under pressure. Holy shit, Martinez, Patterson's voice finally came through the earpiece. That was some shooting. But the mission was far from over. Rodriguez and Jenkins were still struggling to complete their assigned tasks, and the compound was now fully alerted to their presence. Sarah could see enemy personnel mobilizing for a coordinated counterattack that would overwhelm her teammates unless something changed quickly. Rodriguez, you have multiple tangos converging on your position from the south, Sarah reported. Recommend immediate extraction. Negative, Rodriguez replied, his voice strained with frustration and pride. We complete the mission as planned. Sarah watched through her scope as enemy forces continued to mass around her teammates' position. Rodriguez and Jenkins were clearly outmatched by the tactical situation, but their pride was preventing them from making the practical decision to withdraw and regroup. Rodriguez, the tactical situation has changed, Sarah pressed. You're about to be overrun. We can handle it, Rodriguez insisted, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. Sarah could see that her teammates were about to make a fatal error driven by ego and inexperience. The enemy forces were positioning themselves for an assault that would likely result in capture or casualties, ending not only their mission but potentially their military careers. She made a decision that would change everything. I'm moving to provide close support, Sarah announced, already beginning to pack her equipment. Negative. Rodriguez's voice was sharp with authority. Maintain your position and provide overwatch on the extraction route. But Sarah was already moving, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to approach the compound from an unexpected angle. She had spent hours studying the topographical maps and identifying approach routes that the enemy would not anticipate. As she moved, Sarah could hear the radio chatter between her teammates growing more desperate. The enemy counterattack was beginning, and Rodriguez and Jenkins were discovering that their tactical planning had been insufficient for the reality of the situation. We're taking fire from multiple positions, Jenkins reported, his voice tight with stress.
Patterson, can you provide supporting fire? Rodriguez demanded.
Negative, I'm pinned down by sniper fire from the compound, Patterson replied. Sarah reached a position approximately 400 meters from the compound, with clear fields of fire on the enemy positions that were threatening her teammates. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different locations as enemy personnel attempted to suppress and maneuver against Rodriguez and Jenkins.
This is Martinez, she announced over the radio. I have clear shots on the enemy positions engaging your location. Request permission to engage.
The silence that followed her transmission seemed to last forever. Sarah knew that Rodriguez was faced with a choice that challenged everything he believed about her capabilities and role on the team. Finally, his voice came through the earpiece, heavy with reluctance and wounded pride.
Permission granted. Engage at will.
What happened next would be talked about in military sniper schools for years to come. Sarah began systematically engaging the enemy positions with a combination of speed and precision that defied conventional understanding of long-range marksmanship. Her shots came in rapid succession, each one carefully planned and flawlessly executed. She identified priority targets based on their threat level and tactical position, eliminating enemy personnel in an order that maximized disruption to their coordinated attack. The first enemy sniper fell to a shot through his scope, the bullet traveling nearly 500 meters through desert air that shimmered with heat distortion. The second target was eliminated as he attempted to relocate to a better firing position, Sarah's bullet finding him despite his efforts to move quickly between covered positions. One by one, the enemy positions fell silent as Sarah worked through her target list with methodical precision. Her shooting was not just accurate but intelligent, disrupting the enemy's tactical plan by eliminating key personnel and forcing the remaining enemies into defensive positions where they could no longer threaten her teammates.
Multiple tangos down, Patterson reported, his voice filled with amazement. The entire southern position has gone quiet.
Sarah continued engaging targets, her rifle barking steadily as she provided the covering fire that Rodriguez and Jenkins needed to complete their mission objectives. The original high-value targets, forgotten in the chaos of the counterattack, fell to her bullets when she finally had clear shots on their positions.
In less than 15 minutes, Sarah had single-handedly turned a failing mission into a complete success.
The compound was secure, all mission objectives had been achieved, and her teammates were safe from the enemy forces that had threatened to overrun their positions. Mission complete, Rodriguez finally announced over the radio, his voice subdued.
All objectives achieved. Moving to extraction point.
As Team Charlie regrouped at their rally point, Sarah could see the mix of emotions playing across her teammates' faces. There was gratitude for her intervention, amazement at her shooting skills, but also something else, a wounded pride that came from being rescued by someone they had dismissed as incapable. The helicopter extraction passed in relative silence, each team member lost in their own thoughts about what had just occurred. Sarah stared out at the desert landscape, wondering if her actions had finally proven her worth to her teammates or if they would find new reasons to doubt her capabilities. Back at the base, Commander Thompson debriefed each team separately, reviewing their performance and providing feedback on their tactical decisions. When Sarah's turn came, she found herself sitting across from Thompson in his Spartan office, unsure of what to expect. "That was quite a performance out there, Martinez," Thompson began, his steel-gray eyes studying her intently. "Your teammates have provided some interesting commentary on your contributions to the mission." Sarah braced herself for criticism, expecting to hear that her decision to abandon her assigned position had been interpreted as insubordination or recklessness. "They said you saved their asses," Thompson continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Rodriguez admitted that without your intervention, his team